Hello, I'm Sarah Coates and you're watching I-24 News. We begin with US President Donald Trump's recognition of Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, and the European Union has come out strongly against it, saying it will not follow the US's lead. Foreign Affairs Chief Federica Mogherini issuing a statement a short while ago saying the position of the European Union regarding the status of the Golan Heights has not changed, adding that this is in line with international law and UN Security Council resolutions 242 and 497. Now, Resolution 242 was passed just months after the Six-Day War, which calls for an unspecified withdrawal of Israeli armed forces from territories occupied in the recent conflict, while 497 went through back in 1981, which cites the annexation as null and void. Meanwhile, the United Nations Security Council will meet later today at the request of Syria regarding Trump's decision to recognise Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. Syria is describing the decision as a flagrant violation of Security Council resolutions, issuing a 15-page letter to the UN. Meanwhile, the UN Special Envoy to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict says that the UN Security Council must condemn Hamas rocket fire into Israel, making the remarks at yesterday's monthly Security Council briefing in New York.
I ask you all today to join the United Nations in condemning the continued indiscriminate firing of rockets towards Israel. Such acts of provocation only dramatically increase the risk of escalation and ultimately damage our collective efforts to support the people of Gaza and intra-Palestinian reconciliation. We must also call on all sides to exercise maximum restraint as the situation remains extremely tense.
Let's move now to Gaza, and a sense of somewhat calm has fallen over Israeli communities on the border with the enclave following a tense escalation over the last 48 hours, which saw a barrage of rockets fired from both Hamas and Israel. Shops and schools on the Israeli side have reopened, although it's unclear just how long this will last. And for more, let's now go to our senior Middle East correspondent, Mohammed Al-Qasem, who is standing by on the Israel-Gaza border. Mohammed, thank you. Tell us, what is the very latest on the ground there? How fragile is this situation?
Yes, sir. As very much as fragile. There's a tense calm hovering over the area, but it doesn't mean that it's back to complete quiet and calm. We still see large deployment of Israeli military hardware in the area. We've seen dozens of tanks brought to this area, and also the recall of reserves here, Israeli military reserves into the area. And despite the reopening of schools, despite the reopening of many roads leading to this area and allowing the trains and the other means of transportation to resume, still there is a tense feel that with one rocket or one projectile fired from the Gaza Strip into Israel, that may mean that there will be retaliation from the Israeli military. We may see airstrikes as a retaliation, which may ignite violence again. Sarah?
Mohammed, tell us, what are we hearing from the Palestinians and especially Hamas?
We've seen the head of Hamas political arm, Ismail Haniyeh, come out today. In fact, he visited a number of locations and buildings that were destroyed by the recent airstrikes by the Israeli Air Force, and he vowed that that the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip will rebuild these buildings. Among those buildings that were destroyed were his own office, Mr. Haniyeh's office, and he also called on all Palestinians, not only in the Gaza Strip, but also in the West Bank and in Jerusalem, to come out on Saturday, which marks the one-year anniversary for the March of Return. He called on them to come out and show support for the March of Return and demonstrate on Saturday. This is going to be a tense couple of days coming in. I mean, today is Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We won't see as much of activities for the March of Return, but the main day is Saturday, which, by the way, coincides coincides with Land Day. So we may see a heightened level of tension come this weekend.
And Mohammed, we're hearing a lot about an Egyptian delegation. Tell us, when can we expect that delegation to enter the Strip, and do you believe they'll make any headway in talks, if and when they do?
The Egyptians have been working over time since this current round of violence began a few days ago, and they have been in communication with both the Israeli side as well as the Hamas and Islamic Jihad side. And according to media outlets in the Gaza Strip, the Egyptian delegations have submitted an offer this evening to the Hamas movement, saying that they should suspend the March of Return activities and also accept a one-year ceasefire. That's the news we're getting from Palestinian sources. It hasn't been confirmed by either side, whether it's the Israeli or the Palestinian sides. But they have been working very hard. They have been in contact with the Palestinian and Israeli officials, and they are probably the reason also, among other reasons, to why we are seeing this fragile calm in the area.
Okay, senior Middle East correspondent Mohammed Al-Qasem, thank you so much for bringing us up to date. Israel's ruling Likud party is calling on the state comptroller to open a criminal investigation into past business dealings by the leader of Israel's newly formed Blue and White party, Benny Gantz. Likud is claiming that Gantz's now defunct company, the Fifth Dimension, which used to deal in cyber security, did business with the police without a legal contract. The state comptroller releasing a report today which says dealings between Gantz's company lost the police force more than $1 million, but that a number would have reportedly skyrocketed if the Fifth Dimension didn't go bankrupt. Meanwhile, a new poll on Israel's upcoming elections has just been released, showing Likud, led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, currently holding a narrow lead, while Gantz's Blue and White party is tailing closely. The poll, conducted by Panels Politics for Israel's Walla News, has Likud at 31 seats, while Blue and White would win 30 if the elections were held today. It's also got Netanyahu's most likely coalition allies taking an outright majority in the Israeli Parliament. Now to Brexit, and the British Parliament is searching for another way around Prime Minister Theresa May's twice-defeated deal as she's attempting a final try to get the support of rogue party members. It still remains unclear when or if Britain will leave the European Union, with opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn coming out to ask May, what's your plan B?
This chaotic and incompetent government has driven our country into chaos. You know the scale of the crisis, Mr. Speaker, when the TUC and the CBI are united in writing to the Prime Minister saying that a plan B must be found to protect workers, the economy and the Irish border. My question on Monday went unanswered. So will the Prime Minister now say what is her plan B?
We are continuing to work to ensure that we can deliver Brexit for the British people and guarantee that we deliver Brexit for the British people. We have a deal which cancels our EU membership fee, which stops the EU making our laws, which gives us our own immigration policy, ends the common agricultural policy for good, ends the common fisheries policy for good. Other options don't do that. Other options would lead to delay, to uncertainty and risk never delivering Brexit.
And there's been a major find in East Jerusalem, with archaeologists uncovering the ruins of a 2,000-year-old Jewish village unearthed during excavation in the Shurafat neighbourhood. It includes the remains of a burial site, along with winemaking facilities, an olive press and a Jewish bath. It all dates back to the Hasmonean era, with elaborate stones, pillars and other elements common during the Second Temple period. And we're going out for a short break, but when we come back, there are just 2 days until mass protests are expected on the Israel-Gaza border as Hamas calls on 1 million Palestinians to mark a year since weekly Friday demonstrations began. Our senior Middle East correspondent takes a look at just what we can expect right after the break. Stay with us.
Stories. Stories that touch your heart and open your eyes. Stories that take you on a journey and show you something you will never forget. Look through the lens and see what others see. High definition, documentaries and discussions that connect us all.
David, what should we lead with tonight? Iran, China, Russia, DC?
How about North Korea?
Well, on Crossroads, we usually cover them all. I'm Tal Heinrich.
And I'm David Schuster. Join us each night for hard-hitting interviews, detailed analysis,
and the most important information you need to know.
Go beyond the headlines every day on I-24 News. Host Ami Kaufman talks to the news makers and pundits to bring you the story behind the headlines.
Watch The Spin Room, Mondays and Thursdays, 4:05 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
Esta semana en News 24, regalo para Netanyahu. A semanas de las elecciones, Trump reconoce los Altos de Golán como territorio israelí. Analizaremos el panorama electoral desde el punto de vista del mundo árabe con Ali Waket, director del canal árabe de I-24 News. La batalla del agua. El agua es un recurso escaso tanto para israelíes como palestinos. ¿Podría llevar el agua a reanudar las negociaciones de paz? News 24, el magazine semanal en español de I-24 News.
Thanks for staying with us. Let's now go back to one of our top stories. In Israel's ruling Likud party is calling on the state comptroller to open a criminal investigation into past business dealings by the leader of Israel's newly formed Blue and White party, Benny Gantz. Likud is claiming that Gantz's now defunct company, the Fifth Dimension, which used to deal in cybersecurity, did business with the police without a legal contract. And for more on this story, let's now bring in our diplomatic correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. Mike, thank you. All right, so can you break all of this down for us?
Sure. So Benny Gantz, now candidate for Prime Minister, former IDF Chief of Staff, as you mentioned, for several years, ran an artificial intelligence company which helped with threat assessment, police profiling, things of that nature, artificial intelligence company. He worked out a deal with the Israeli police. It turned out to be a no-tender deal, although it was worth about $1.1 million and should have gone through the tender process. It should have been bid out. Now, the state comptroller released a report today, did not name Gantz's company specifically, but one can connect the dots and put forward some accusations that things were not done above board. Basically, that the company in question met with the police in a suspect fashion while internal deliberations were going on about which company they should hire. This particular company under accusation was involved in those meetings, which certainly should not have been the case. Other accusations made in this particular report say again that the legal tender should have gone out, that this should not have been a no-bid process, and also that this company got policing technology at a discount in order to develop this product, this solution, which was supposed to be included in this tender process. So basically, the accusation is that this company benefited in a number of ways it shouldn't monetarily, and now the Likud party under Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is calling for an official investigation by the Attorney General.
Okay, and Mike, Israeli elections just around the corner, slated for April 9, and Walla News has just released this new poll showing Likud winning 31 seats and Blue and White winning 30. Tell us, how reliable is this?
Walla has kind of been the outlier of the last few weeks. Walla has been the only poll showing that the Likud party is ahead of Blue and White. Likud in this poll actually is down 1 seat from where they were last week, but most of the polls showing Blue and White still ahead. What every poll is showing, though, consistently is that Benjamin Netanyahu will be able to form a coalition much more easily than Benny Gantz will be able to form a coalition. You got to keep in mind, it's not which party gets the most votes and the most seats. It's which leader is able to form a coalition, getting a majority, 61 out of 120 seats in the Israeli parliament. There is no poll showing that Gantz will be able to do that, even if he's given the mandate. The polls are showing that Netanyahu will be able to accomplish that.
Okay, and Mike, we know that the UN Security Council is convening right now regarding US President Donald Trump's recognition of Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. So tell us, what can we expect to come out of this?
A whole lot of noise and nothing practical, which is usually what comes out of the UN Security Council. And remember, the U.S. has veto power in the Security Council anyway, so even if a resolution is proposed, the U.S. will almost certainly veto it. There are some countries up in arms, particularly Russia, Iran, countries of that nature about Donald Trump's recognition. Of course, the Palestinians are. And there are even U.S. and Israel-friendly countries like Germany and Britain, while not vehemently opposing it, are still voicing their concern with the recognition because it could lead to other things. Certainly, Russia can then say, well, where's our recognition over Crimea? And the sovereignty over Crimea. So those things will be discussed today, but in the end, nothing will come of it because the U.S. does have veto power within the Security Council.
Okay, Mike Wagenheim, thank you for breaking that down. Now, the Trump administration's decision to recognise Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights is being celebrated in Jerusalem, but it's sparking intense criticism from Europe and the Arab world. Our Middle East correspondent Emily Rose reports.
As U.S. President Donald Trump touts the accomplishment of signing a decree recognizing Israeli sovereignty.
Continue to make the Golan Heights a potential launching ground for attacks against Israel.
The Jewish cemetery of Warsaw, which looks like a scene out of a spooky movie. The fractured nature of the Warsaw Cemetery reflects the experience of the Jews who came to Warsaw as early as the 15th century. They were banned from living within city limits until the 1800s. Already over 150,000 people had been buried here. But in spite of it all, there was always hope that the Jewish people would come home to Israel. The cemetery also pays homage to a hero, Janusz Korczak, the director of an orphanage who refused the Nazis' offer to leave Poland and perished in Treblinka death camp.
And he said, no, I will stay with the kids. He knew that they will need him when they come to the crisis.
Next stop was the last remaining original brick wall of the Warsaw Ghetto, followed by the Umschlagplatz, which translates to reloading place. Today's commuter trains are a chilling reminder of what happened here 77 years ago. This is the northern end of the Warsaw Ghetto, an area where 400,000 people lived in squalor in an area the size of 1 square mile. It is here in 1942 when 250,000 Jews walked here in front of the Gestapo headquarters, where they sat in what is now a street, waiting for trains to transport them to the Treblinka death camp. Today, the Warsaw Ghetto has been replaced by a hip new neighborhood with young families and no vestiges of the past.
In a few years, there is going to be apartments and parks, and there is going to be just nothing left of it. So for me, as a human being, it's very, very important to do this journey.
If there is one thing that people who did not survive the Holocaust would like us is to remember them.
Day one ended on a high note with a visit to the Noziek Synagogue, the only surviving pre-war house of worship of the over 400 synagogues. And our half-hour service breathed new life into the ghosts of the past. In Warsaw, Poland, Emily Francis, I-24 News.
And that is all we have time for this edition of I-24 News. I'm Sarah Coates. Thanks for watching.